This is the Strong is a Mindset podcast, episode number 157. If you want to know how to eat to build muscle, this is your episode. We're talking protein, carbs, and calories, and we're also debunking myths and cutting through the confusion to help you optimize your approach to building muscle. This is the Strong is a Mindset podcast, where you'll learn how to build both a strong body and a strong mind by eating, moving, and thinking. I'm your host, physician, personal trainer, certified health coach, and certified life coach, Carrie Holland. Hey, how are you? What's new? What's good? So, what's good here? We are talking about how to eat to build muscle today. So this is something that comes up frequently. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of opinions about how to do it. And like most things in fitness and science, there really is no one absolute right way to do this, despite what any one influencer, book, or podcast says. And my goal today is to cut through some of the muck and help you make sense of this. And to be totally honest, I think this is one of the most misunderstood areas of fitness. There are still so many myths, misconceptions, and misunderstandings about how to eat to support building muscle. And I can say this because I'm constantly having to reassure clients that eating carbs while lifting is not a problem and it's not going to make them fat. And in fact, it's essential to optimize muscle building. And there are many other misconceptions like this one, like calorie deficits and protein timing that we need to talk through, and we will. But to take a step back for a minute, what's most cool, to me anyway, is the serious growth and interest in building muscle that necessitates a podcast episode like this one in the first place. So until not too recently, the focus for so many women was, what do I do to lose weight? How do I get thin? How do I get into a smaller pant size? But now, thankfully, we are learning more and more that it's not about being thin. It's not about being small. Now, the focus is on being strong. Now, the focus is on having muscle, and I am here for it. So this is where we're going today. We're going to talk about why muscle matters. We'll also talk about the basics and cover what you need to know about eating to fuel the muscle building process. And then we're also going to get into some of the topics that are super hot right now, things that are getting a lot of attention in the news and in the influencer space that I want to address head on. All right, so let's go. So first, let's talk about why bother. Why should you care about building muscle in the first place? Well, I will be so bold to put it out there and state that having muscle, whether you're a man, a woman, young, old, whatever, having muscle really is a non-negotiable. Muscle really is your key to longevity. And if you've hung around here at all, you may have heard me share about this, but let me reiterate why having muscle matters. So first, and this may be obvious, but having muscle improves your strength. So you can get up and down the stairs, so you can pick up a heavy box, so you can get your luggage into the overhead compartment. And while muscle improves your strength, it also improves your endurance, so you can chase your kids, your pet, your grandkids. And while we most commonly think of strength training as the way to build muscle, it also helps strengthen your bones to reduce your risk of osteoporosis and fractures. And the combination of muscle and bone strength helps reduce your risk of sprains, strains, falls, and other injuries. So muscle also improves your metabolism. It's more metabolically active than fat. And all that means is that it burns more calories at rest than fat. So the more muscle you have, the more calories you need to sustain that muscle, and the higher your metabolism will be. Muscle also has a role in insulin sensitivity, and it helps regulate your blood sugar and reduce your overall risk of type 2 diabetes. It can help to decrease your blood pressure. It can lead to improved brain health and memory. And aside from all of the physical health benefits that you get from having muscle, let's not forget all of the mental health benefits that it gets you too. So strength training and having muscle have been linked to better quality of life, improved mood, and reduced symptoms of depression and anxiety. So I heard this saying recently, and I think it applies. Strength training, or really having muscle, will add years to your life and life to your years. And to that, I say a great big amen. Yes, it will most definitely do both. Having muscle will add both to your quantity and quality of life. Okay? So now that you know why muscle matters, let's talk about what you need to know in order to eat to build muscle. So remember two things when it comes to muscle: stimulus and support, or to get more specific, lifting heavy stuff and eating. You can think of strength training as the message to your body that says, hey, build muscle. And then the food you eat gives you the tools to do it. And so this right here is where some of you and even some of my clients have cringed. So let me spell it out. If you want muscle, you have to eat, okay? You have to eat if you want to build muscle. And I get it. This goes counter to what so many of us have lived. This goes counter to everything we were brought up with. This goes counter to the idea of doing cardio and spending hours on the treadmill or stair stepper to sweat yourself into a smaller clothing size while eating as little food as possible. This is what some people still equate with weight loss. And so I understand why the idea of eating to build muscle would make you cringe. But the truth is, if you strength train but do not feed yourself properly, it's not going to work. You're not going to build the muscle you're hoping for, all right? And I can say all of this because I was there, okay? When I got into natural bodybuilding years ago, I had some muscle, but I wanted more. I was already strength training, but I was eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and turkey sandwiches and Cheetos. I was eating a Nutri-Grain bar for breakfast. It was not enough food. And then when I started working with a coach and he told me I needed to start eating more, I freaked out. Because my immediate thought was, I'm going to get fat. And that was exactly the opposite of what I was aiming for. But I had to learn and understand and see for myself that in order to put on muscle, you have to eat, like real food in sufficient quantities. And so it wasn't until I was willing to trust what he was saying and trust the process and actually eat real whole food that I understood just exactly what it takes to build muscle. So I get it. I understand that the idea of eating to build muscle might freak you out, but please hear me. That's what it takes. Lifting heavy and eating. Both are necessary if you want to put on muscle. Now, if you want to eat to build muscle, here's what you want to consider. So first, you want to make protein a priority. I have talked about it hundreds of times here on the podcast, but that's only because protein is so important. Your body uses protein after you strength train to repair your muscles so that they come back bigger and stronger for your next strength training session. So remember, your food is your tool to build muscle, and protein is an essential tool. Now, the amount of protein that you need to build muscle is still and probably will continue to be hotly debated. So if you go to the books, the most frequently cited range of protein intake that you'll find is 1.2 to 2.0 grams per kilograms of body weight per day. And if you convert that, it's 0.55 to 0.91 grams per pound of body weight per day. That's ideal body weight. This range is what's supported by the American College of Sports Medicine, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and Dietitians of Canada. So the International Society of Sports Nutrition supports a slightly higher range, starting at 0.64 to 0.91 grams per pound per day. So I know that we just talked about a lot of numbers, but let me throw one more into the mix. Where does the 1 gram per pound of body weight recommendation come from for protein? So in full transparency, it is not evidence-based. I totally went into the weeds on this and admittedly went down a rabbit hole and found that there is no scientific study, there is no repeatable body of literature or research, and there is no authority that suggests 1 gram per pound of protein. Instead, what I did find is that 1 gram per pound has come to be an accepted guideline in the fitness, bodybuilding, and influencer world. So the 1 gram per pound suggestion most likely comes from rounding up. So if you remember earlier, I said 0.91 grams per pound. That's close to 1. And so it's thought that the 1 gram per pound recommendation comes from coaches and bodybuilders who round it up for clarity, consistency, and ease. And this recommendation has been pushed by well-known influencers and names in the bodybuilding and strength training world and has gained enough traction that it's come into common use. So 1 gram per pound is a practical rule of thumb that's easy to remember and close to the scientifically quoted upper limit of 0.91 grams per pound. But if you go looking like I did, you will see that this is not an evidence-based recommendation. So now let's get into the nuance, because many of you who have been around here or have searched this up, or if you follow various influencers or listen to books or podcasts about this, you may have come across protein intake recommendations of more than 1 gram per pound. So let's talk about that. There may be instances where eating more than 1 gram per pound of protein can be helpful, but let me be super clear that the evidence here is not at all a slam dunk, and these recommendations are coming from smaller studies. So first, if you are in a caloric deficit or a fat loss phase, there are some studies that suggest a higher protein intake of up to 1.4 grams of protein per pound per day may be beneficial to maximize lean muscle mass retention. So, plain English, if you're in a calorie deficit to lose weight, you may benefit from a higher protein intake that helps preserve your muscle. But again, to be clear, this is not a universal recommendation. And what I found is that many, if not most, of the studies that looked at protein intake greater than 1 gram per pound were using highly trained athletes. So these are your endurance athletes, 2-a-day, multi-session athletes, MMA fighters, bodybuilders, and elite CrossFitters. So we have to take all of this with a grain of salt when we're applying this to the average person who lifts a few days a week or who is a weekend warrior who lifts once or twice per week. All right, so the key takeaway here is that for most people, consuming approximately 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight is what's recommended in the fitness world for building muscle. But that exact number is not evidence-based and likely represents some rounding and estimation. And there may be instances when eating more protein, like up to 1.4 grams of protein per pound of body weight, can be useful, like if you're trying to preserve lean muscle mass while in a fat loss phase or calorie deficit. But this recommendation is not universal. Okay, so remember 1 gram per pound up to 1.4 grams per pound if you're in a fat loss phase. There's your numbers. Now, let's talk about another question that comes up all the time related to protein intake, and that is, how much protein should you eat at a time? So this is one of the most misunderstood areas of protein science, so I'm going to try and clear this up here. So the idea that your body can only absorb 30 grams of protein in one meal, that is a myth. But there is science behind muscle building limits per meal, and that's likely what people are referring to. So let me help you clean this up and make sense of this. Here's a key thing to know. Your body absorbs all the protein you eat. It doesn't waste the rest after you've eaten 30 grams of protein in a meal. But there is a limit to how much protein in one single meal will contribute to muscle protein synthesis. And science says that's about 20 to 40 grams of protein per meal for the typical adult athlete. That's the key distinction. Your body isn't wasting the protein after 30 grams, but it just may not be going towards building muscle. It may be going towards other body functions, like building and maintaining hormones and enzymes, or it may be used for energy or converted to glucose. So the key distinction here is that the protein is not getting wasted, but it may not all be going towards muscle building. All right, so here's what you need to know about how much protein your body can actually use at one time to build muscle. For most people, the sweet spot for muscle protein synthesis is about 20 to 40 grams of high-quality protein per meal, or roughly 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. Eating more than that in a single sitting does not mean it's wasted, but the extra protein likely won't go towards building muscle. And if you're in a calorie deficit, your total daily protein needs go up, but the maximum protein your body can use for muscle building per meal doesn't increase much. And the key, according to the literature, is spreading your protein intake throughout the day to support both growth and recovery. Okay? So now, while we're on the topic of protein, let's talk about leucine for a minute, because it's also getting a lot of attention lately. Leucine is one of the 9 essential amino acids, which means your body can't make it on its own. You have to get it from food. What makes leucine so important is that it acts as a trigger for muscle protein synthesis. So think of leucine as the signal that tells your body, hey, it's time to build muscle. And of all the amino acids, leucine is the most powerful at activating that process. And without enough of it, even if you have all the other amino acids available, muscle building will not be maximized. And so that is why leucine matters. And what we're learning in the science is that you need about 2 to 3 grams of leucine in a meal to trigger that muscle building process to begin. And you can get that from animal sources like chicken, beef, pork, tuna, milk, and cheese. So for example, a 3.5 ounce serving of chicken has about 2 grams of leucine. That same amount of tofu gets you around 1.7 grams of leucine. You'll also find leucine in eggs, seeds, oats, legumes, but plant-based sources tend to be lower in leucine overall, so you may need a bit more volume to hit your target. And it's generally recommended to get your leucine from whole food sources versus just taking a leucine supplement. And if you're wondering why, it's because a leucine-only supplement is not enough to sustain muscle building. You need the other essential amino acids too in order to carry out the muscle building process. So remember, leucine is the signal that gets the process started, but you have to have the other essential amino acids present in order to complete the process. And remember that whole foods like eggs, meat, dairy, and soy, they are considered complete proteins that contain all 9 essential amino acids. And that's what we're aiming for, to give your body the building materials it needs so it can go and build muscle. All right? So to wrap up on protein for building muscle, the key takeaway here is to ensure that you're getting at least 1 gram per pound up to 1.4 grams per pound if you're in a calorie deficit. And be sure you're getting high quality protein that has leucine, which you'll find in most animal sources and plant sources. And one last thing I want to be sure and address while we're talking about protein is the timing of your protein intake. So there is a lot of noise and a lot of hype lately around protein timing, especially for peri and menopausal women. So I want to tackle this and help you make sense of this. So let me give you the quick and dirty from the get-go. There is no strict window that requires you to consume protein immediately before or after strength training to optimize muscle building in perimenopausal and menopausal women. So the idea that you have to load yourself with protein before your workout and then rack your weights and hurry up and down eggs or a protein shake within 30 minutes or else your gains are lost, that is not the case, okay? I want to make that super clear. Now, that being said, there is a recommendation from the International Society of Sports Nutrition, or the ISSN, that peri and postmenopausal women consume 10 grams of protein close to the beginning and or shortly after completing exercise to optimize muscle protein synthesis. But the society also goes on to emphasize that really it's the total daily protein intake that matters more than the exact timing of when you get your protein, and that the protein intake is distributed throughout your day. So that was a lot of words. Let me pare this down. Get your protein in total, and get it in over the course of your day. And don't worry so much about getting it in right before or right after you exercise. Okay. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because there is so much noise currently about making sure to eat protein before lifting. And some influencers and scientists are swearing by this, which has caused a lot of confusion and doubt in the fitness world. It's making some women, myself included, scratch their heads and wonder if they've been doing it wrong this whole time. So let me help you put your fears to rest and say you do not absolutely have to eat your protein before you lift, and you don't have to hurry up and shovel it in within 30 minutes after you finish. And if you go to the science, you'll find that there is, as of now anyway, no high-quality evidence from randomized controlled trials that support the need for peri or menopausal women to eat protein immediately before or after strength training to optimize their muscle building. So the good news is that there's a lot of interest in this, and we may learn more in the future that leads to a change in this recommendation. But as of now, again, it's total protein intake spread over the day that seems to matter more than timing. When there's good, repeatable, high-quality evidence to suggest otherwise, I'll record a follow-up, but that may take a while. And I've said it before, this is the beauty and the crazy of science. It can take years, or really decades, to get enough data and science to support recommendations, and you may not want to wait that long. And I hear that. So this is not to bash what any one scientist or one influencer is suggesting. It's really to highlight that science is slow. There are newer recommendations from influencer scientists that are getting a lot of attention, and you may choose to follow those recommendations because it could be years before we know definitively what the impact of protein timing is on building muscle, and you may not want to wait that long. So again, the takeaway here is that currently, what we know is that total protein intake matters more than protein timing. And while there's a lot of noise about protein timing currently, we don't have enough science to call this a slam dunk that you must eat protein before lifting weights to optimize your muscle building. So do not feel that you're doing it wrong if you're not eating protein immediately before or immediately after you lift. Okay? All right. So we just talked a whole lot about protein, and I hope that helps. And now let's switch gears and talk about carbs. And I want to hit this on the head because I've had conversations with many clients who are afraid of carbs because carbs have been vilified. And again, I want to bust this up. So let's talk about why carbs matter for building muscle. Carbs do not directly build muscle like protein does, but they do play an important supporting role, and they influence how effectively you build muscle. So strength training relies heavily on glycogen, which is how carbs are stored in your muscles. So More glycogen equals better performance, heavier lifts, potentially more reps, which equals more muscle building stimulus. Okay, so carbs are important because they fuel your workouts. And carbs also support recovery. So when you're done strength training, eating carbs will help restore the glycogen that you used during your workout. Carbs will also help reduce muscle breakdown and support the muscle repair process that gets underway once your workout is done. Carbs will stimulate your body's insulin response, and that helps drive nutrients like protein into your muscle cells to rebuild and repair after you lift. So even though the carbs don't make muscle directly, they support the process by driving insulin. And the other thing to know about carbs is that they help you spare protein. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you don't eat enough carbs in your diet, your body may start to break down protein for energy instead. And the impact of this is that it diverts amino acids away from the process of building muscle, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. Okay, so to summarize, carbs don't directly build your muscle, but they give you the power to lift heavier, train harder, and recover better. There are a number of reasons that carbs matter when you're trying to build muscle. They help fuel your workouts, they support recovery after your workout, and they help keep the protein that you have in your system for its intended use of building muscle instead of getting broken down for energy. So now the next question to address is, how much carbs do you need? And again, there is wide variance on this with no one right absolute answer. If you go to the science, you'll find the recommendation is anywhere from 1.4 up to 4.5 grams per pound per day, sometimes more. So as an example, a 150-pound person may eat anywhere from 200 to 400 plus grams of carbs per day, even up to over 600 grams per day, depending on who's recommending what. So that is definitely on the higher end, but those higher ranges are often reserved for super intense, high volume training or athletes who train multiple sessions in a day. So if your carb intake is too low, you may be compromising your glycogen stores, and that will lead to fatigue, potentially less power in your training sessions, and even impaired muscle growth, even if you're taking in enough protein. So as for the recommendations for the distribution of carbs, again, the jury is still out on the optimal distribution pattern, meaning we just don't know with 100% certainty what the best way to spread your carbs out is over the day. But with that being said, the general consensus is to distribute your carbs throughout the day to support the muscle building process and replace your glycogen stores. And again, while there are no hard and fast rules here, many authorities will suggest having some carbohydrates before training to ensure that your glycogen stores are adequate, and then refueling shortly after training to restore your glycogen stores that you deplete during your strength training. Now, this does not mean that you have to race and guzzle a protein drink or eat your oatmeal within 30 minutes of your workout, or it's a waste, okay? You are not losing out on all the benefits of strength training if you're not eating within 30 minutes of your workout, all right? And then one other question I want to address about carbs, because it has definitely come up, is building muscle while following a keto diet. So the question is, can you build muscle without carbs or with very low carbs? So let's think about what we know about keto, carbs, and muscle. A standard keto diet has anywhere from 25 to 50 grams of carbs in a day. That is quite a bit lower than the average carb intake for most people. And as a frame of reference, one medium apple is about 25 grams of carbs. So if you are on the stricter end of a keto diet, you eat one apple a day and that's it. That is the end of your carbs. So on a keto diet, your muscle glycogen stores are low, and that can impact your exercise and strength training performance. So in plain English, you may find that you can't go as hard on the weights if you don't have carbs to fuel your workouts. Now, that being said, if you're super consistent and strict and adhere to the super low carbs and are well adapted to ketosis, you may not notice this. But another thing to take note of here is that following a keto diet also blunts or lessens your insulin response. So remember that eating carbs will drive insulin to shuttle protein and other nutrients into your muscles. When you take out those carbs from your diet, you also take out this response, and you may have potentially less nutrient uptake after your workouts, and that is going to hinder your muscle building. And if you go to the literature, you'll find studies that suggest it's more difficult to gain muscle on a ketogenic diet compared to a moderate or higher carb diet. Keto diets are less effective for muscle growth because of their lower carbohydrates that are available to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And there are a number of studies that show reduced gains in muscle mass even with resistance training. So This is not to say that it is impossible to build muscle on a ketogenic diet, okay? I don't want anyone who's a diehard keto fan to come after me about this, but my point is that it is harder to put on muscle this way because of the important role that carbs play in the muscle building process. So, building muscle on a keto diet is considered harder than building muscle following a moderate carb diet, but it is not impossible. All right, so we've hit on protein and carbs. And now I want to zoom out and hit on one other important part of eating to build muscle, and that is making sure that you're eating enough calories overall to support the work that you're trying to do. So this is where it gets a little hard for some of us. If you're used to trying to eat as little as possible in an effort to shrink down and get thinner and thinner, building muscle doesn't work that way. If you want to build muscle, you've got to eat enough food to fuel the muscle building process. And again, some of you may cringe at that, especially if you've spent much of your adult life dieting. So what I'm going to do here is explain what to know if you want to build muscle in a caloric deficit, at maintenance, or in a surplus, so you know what to do no matter what your caloric goals are. Okay, so first, let's talk about building muscle while in a calorie deficit. So this is when you're eating less calories than your body burns in a day. And the question here is, can you build muscle in a calorie deficit? So the short answer is yes. But I want to put it out there that this is going to be the hardest scenario in which to build muscle because you're asking your body to do two conflicting things at the same time. You're asking your body to lose fat and build muscle simultaneously. But think about what we know from a biologic perspective. Building muscle requires energy, and fat loss means you're purposely giving your body less fuel than it needs. So you're walking a fine line here. Without enough fuel, your body is more focused on conserving resources rather than building new tissue like muscle. That's why it takes super precise nutrition, training, and recovery to build that muscle while you're in a calorie deficit. And it's generally more effective for certain types of people, like beginners who are brand new to strength training, people who are coming back to strength training after a bit of time off, or people with a higher amount of body fat to begin with. So to make this work and to be able to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, you've got to have your ducks in a row, okay? That means your nutrition, your training, and your recovery all need to be dialed in. So that means lifting consistently while aiming for progressive overload, meaning you're regularly challenging your muscles with heavier weights, more reps, or more intensity. It also means eating plenty of protein and shooting for the higher end of your range. So you're looking at least 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, but potentially even more, like up to 1.4 grams per pound of body weight. And you also need to prioritize recovery. That means getting adequate, good quality sleep, managing your stress, and giving yourself rest days to allow your body to rebuild. And remember too, that when you're in a caloric deficit, your body is under more pressure and more stress. So if any of your pillars of strength training, nutrition, or recovery are wobbly, that will make muscle growth less likely. And that is why this approach of building muscle and losing fat simultaneously requires so much intention and really precision. It is not impossible, but it is definitely not easy. And please also remember that your caloric deficit can't be too aggressive. Think small, like 300 or so calories under maintenance. That's it. Because here's the thing. If you go too hard on your deficit, and if you're eating too little, your body is not going to respond the way you want it to. If you don't feed yourself enough, even if you're strength training, your body is not going to build muscle. If you're not giving your body enough food, your body's going to say, whoa, hang on here, we're in trouble. Your body does not care about strength goals and building muscle when it feels starved. It's just trying to keep you alive. And I say this with respect because I see it all the time. So many of my clients start out trying to eat next to nothing. They eat like birds. They hit the gym and they do their strength training, and then they get frustrated when they don't see their muscles growing. But muscle is metabolically expensive, and it takes calories and energy to build it, and your body will not build it if it thinks it's in danger from too much of a calorie deficit. You have to feed your body. You have to feed your muscles. You cannot build from a place of scarcity. So yes, you can build some muscle in a deficit, but this is a delicate balance we're looking at, and the process will likely give you slower results compared to eating at caloric maintenance or in a surplus. And again, that's because you're basically asking your body to do two opposing processes at once, lose fat and build muscle. And that's tough. All right. Next, let's talk about building muscle while in caloric maintenance. So this is when you're eating about the same number of calories as you're burning. So can you build muscle here? Yes, absolutely. This is an especially good option for intermediate lifters who don't want to gain fat, or if you're hesitant about eating in a caloric surplus. And to be honest, this is where a lot of women thrive, especially if you're trying to improve your body composition, but you're not comfortable gaining weight to do it. So what do you need? Well, you need the same building blocks as you would if you were building muscle in a deficit, but with more food. You're eating about the same amount of calories as you burn, and that's what keeps you at maintenance. But you also need consistent strength training combined with enough protein in your diet. So again, I would suggest 1 gram per pound and enough carbs to fuel your workouts so you can lift heavy and stimulate the muscle building process. And again, you also need rest and recovery to allow your muscles to grow. And last, similar to building muscle in a calorie deficit, you need a good amount of patience. You will build muscle at a faster pace than if you were in a calorie deficit, but the results will be slower than if you were eating in a calorie surplus. So this, just like building muscle and losing fat in a calorie deficit, this is playing the long game here. This is many months, if not years, of a long, slow process. And the scale may not change much, but your body will if you stick with the process. It is slower, but it is sustainable. And often it is less mentally stressful than being in a calorie deficit. So bottom line here, if you're happy with your current weight, but want to change how your body looks and performs, maintenance might be where you want to hang out. All right. And last, let's talk about muscle building while eating in a calorie surplus. So can you build muscle here? Yes, absolutely. This is the most efficient scenario for muscle growth. This is where you're eating more calories than you burn, but you're doing it intentionally with a purpose. And the best candidates for this type of muscle building are intermediate or advanced lifters, people who are looking to maximize muscle gain, and people who are okay with possible small fat gains. So let me pause right there because that is where people tend to freak out. As soon as you hear those words, fat gain, you might shake your head and be like, thanks, but no thanks. But here's something to consider. You are not doing this for forever, okay? The idea is not to eat in a surplus for forever, but rather for a few months or maybe even a year with a specific goal of putting on muscle. And when you're in a surplus to build muscle, the idea is that you're in a small surplus, like 200 to 400 or so extra calories per day. And all you're doing is giving your body the extra resources it needs to prioritize muscle growth and repair. And again, the same tools apply here. You're still hitting the weights and aiming for progressive overload. You're still eating adequate protein, again, aiming for at least 1 gram per pound. And you're still giving yourself sleep, rest days, and time to recover. And here's the other thing to point out. When I'm talking about the slight surplus, I do not mean bonbons and french fries, okay? You certainly could take that route, but the idea here is to give yourself a surplus of nutrient-rich foods that add to your supply of protein and carbs to fuel the muscle building process, okay? This is not a free-for-all. If you're aiming to build muscle and minimize fat gain while in a surplus, you want to pay attention to where that surplus is coming from. And ideally, it would be whole carbs and lean protein. So the surplus is not a license to binge. You want quality food, plenty of protein, and a training plan that pushes you to lift heavier over time. That is what will help you maximize muscle and minimize fat gain. And so how do you know when you're done with a surplus? Well, a good indicator is when your strength gains start to plateau, your performance in the gym stabilizes, and you're noticing more fat gain than you're comfortable with. And at that point, it's time to shift your approach. And from there, you've got 2 options. Option 1 is you can move back to maintenance. This gives your body a break from the surplus while helping you hold on to the muscle and strength that you've built. But let me be clear here, this is not the time to expect weight loss. Maintenance means you're eating the amount your body needs to maintain your new weight. That includes the muscle that you just spent months building. The goal here isn't to lose or gain, it's to stay steady. Think of it as sitting at your new elevation. You've built the muscle, now you're maintaining it without the added pressure of bulking or cutting, okay? Option 2 is that you shift into a small, intentional calorie deficit to gradually lean out and reveal more muscle definition. This is where you can fine-tune your body composition. But again, the key is going slowly to preserve the muscle that you've worked so hard to build. And yes, technically, both maintenance and a deficit involve eating less than you were in the surplus, but the difference is in the degree. Maintenance is about staying steady and stable. A deficit is about creating just enough of a shortfall to reduce fat while preserving muscle. And your choice is going to depend on your goals and how your body feels in that process. So, if your goal is to build as much muscle as possible, a slight surplus will get the job done and maximize your gains. But don't confuse this with a license to eat everything in your path. You want to train hard and fuel smart, and when it's time to shift, you do it intentionally. All right? So to summarize this, if your goal is fat loss and muscle maintenance, consider a caloric deficit. If you don't want the scale to change much, aim for maintenance. And if you're all in on gaining muscle and are okay with a temporary gain in fat that you can choose to lose later, a small surplus is the way to go. All right? So to wrap this up, here is the big picture I want you to walk away with. Building muscle is not just for bodybuilders or athletes. It is for you right now, no matter who you are or how old you are. It is for your health, your strength, your longevity, and your confidence. And if you want muscle, you have to give your body what it needs in order to build it. And that's the stimulus of strength training and support through food, rest, and recovery. And you do not have to be perfect about it, but you do have to be intentional. And remember that this, like most things that we talk about here, is a mindset shift. Building muscle by lifting heavy stuff and eating, that might be a different way of thinking about fitness if you've spent years trying to shrink yourself with cardio, or if you've spent years fearing carbs, or if you've spent years thinking less food is what equals more progress. But now we know that's not how it works. To build something new, to build new muscle, you have to fuel it. So whether you're in a deficit, at maintenance, or eating in a surplus, the basics do not change. Lift consistently, eat enough protein, eat your carbs, get sleep, and keep going for a long time. Trust the process of building muscle and give it time. Building muscle takes months, it takes years, and it is entirely worth your effort. All right? And if you want help with this, let's go. When you coach with me, we'll take the guesswork out of your nutrition and training so you can build muscle with confidence without spinning your wheels or second guessing every decision. Check out my website, send me a message at www.carriehollandmd.com/contact, and let's talk about how coaching will change how you see yourself and what your body is capable of. Thank you again for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you again next week. Hey, if you want to build muscle but don't know where to start, I've got you covered. Head over to carriehollandmd.com/buildstrength and download my free guide to help you maximize your strength training. Inside, you'll find the essential exercises for building muscle, plus simple 1, 2, and 3-day workout plans that you can follow with just dumbbells and a bench. You'll also find strength training tips to help you train smarter and see real results. My goal is to help you get strong, and this strength training guide will help you do it. Go to carriehollandmd.com/buildstrength and check it out. Thank you for listening to the Strong is a Mindset podcast. If you want to learn more about how to build both a strong mind and a strong body by eating, moving, and most importantly, thinking, check out carriehollandmd.com.